Hello and welcome to Winter in Dylan Knows headquarters. My name is Dylan Lang. My usual show is Dylan Knows. I've been doing it for 11 and a half years now. Not quite a half years, but 11 some years. And I've done some offshoots, one of which is my list shows. And the last few days, I've been trying to catch up on my 12 lists of Christmas. Unfortunately, it is the 22nd of December, which means there's only 2 days to Christmas Eve, 3 days to Christmas, and I'm not going to have enough time to do 6 of them in the next few days. I'll be doing one more, the second part of this one, and that's probably going to be it for my Christmas stuff. And the rest of the ones I had planned, I will save for next year. So, if those who weren't aware of what I said on my show last night, my Dylan Knows show, my usual show I do Saturday nights at 11 o'clock, my basement has been dark because it's been fall and autumn, and that's the Halloween and the darkness descending, whatever. And then the first day of winter was on Saturday, and from that point on, it was the darkest day. So I had one more dark episode, and I said, as soon as that one's over, we're going to start getting more light. We got 2 seconds, I think, of sunlight back today. It's going to keep increasing and increasing and increasing as we get more, maybe 2 minutes. 2 seconds sounds stupid. I think we got maybe 2 minutes worth of our sunshine back, and it's going to gradually keep coming until we get to the summer solstice, which is the day after my birthday this year, not next year. This year was on my birthday since it was leap year, but next year it goes back to the 21st of June, and then the light will go back down again. That's just how the cycle of the round Earth goes. So, so I figured the biggest thing about the winter seasons is light, Christmas lights, Yule logs, all the stuff. Just the season of lights is basically what it is. So I figured let's get back to the lights, because you got to keep the lights on during the winter because it is so dark and cold and bleak. But I don't mind it. I know there's a lot of people that don't, but I don't mind it. So here we go. So this is my, as I said, first of a 2-parter. I have this list is going to be the top 50 best Christmas movies as determined by me and only me. They do not include Hallmark movies. Nothing against them. They're very acceptable, and I've never watched a single one of them, and I'm not using that as a flex or anything. I'm just saying they don't interest me. And if I had been watching them, they did interest me, I would probably be doing the best Hallmark Christmas movies, because there's so many of them. But I'm not. These are movies that came out in movie theaters that have Christmas, that are considered, for the most part, Christmas movies. There are honorable mentions for specific reasons. We'll get into those a little later about why those are there. But we've got discussions on all these. This is my list. It's a fluid list. Doesn't mean that next year, if I did this list again, the same order would come up. Some might be taken off. Other ones that I hadn't seen before might be back on. Ones I rewatched with different eyes and either liked more or hated more could be moved up and down on the list. So this is just my decision. Sorry, I had Chinese food, so got some broccoli stuck in my teeth. And the majority of these are films that are, as I said, considered to be straight up Christmas movies. None of this, well, it may or may not be, but we'll talk about those in a little bit. This list also does not have any adaptations of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, because I did a list of the best adaptations of those already, and it wouldn't be fair to have them on 2 lists. So yes, I really love Scrooge a lot. Scrooge would be probably in my top 5 if I added that. Muppet Christmas Carol probably in my top 5 also. So I didn't want to do that since they had their own list. So this does not have any Hallmark movies, does not have any Christmas Carol adaptations to it. So some of these are ones, a few of them are ones that came out recently and have been on streaming and not necessarily in movie theaters, but they are still considered movies. There are some that are a little older. There are some that are more recent. There are some that are in the sweet spot that was the 80s and 90s. So I got a whole bunch of different ones to talk about. Some you may have heard of, some you don't. I've also combined ones that had sequels attached to it. I did not separate the sequels out because, again, it would be taking a slot away from a different Christmas movie because there's so many Christmas movies out there that I wanted to get people to hear and talk about and see. So if there's a Christmas movie that has a bunch of sequels, good example is the Santa Claus. All three of their movies will be in whatever ranking the Santa Claus is at, which is basically stating, while I might not agree that, if, let's just say Santa Claus like number 5, that is a number chosen by all three of the movies combined. I might not like the third one all that much, and that really probably doesn't deserve to be on the list probably. But it does contain sort of similar characters and settings and stuff like that. So that's kind of how my thinking is, and I kind of like it. There's a few surprises on here that you might be surprised about, and maybe some that you've never heard of before. Maybe that make you go, it's interesting. So here we go. As I said, this is part 1, numbers 50 through 26. But as always, I have 2 honorable mentions for this one. I also have 2 honorable mentions for 25 to 1. So honorable mention number 1 is Black Christmas. Christmas horror is a genre upon itself. And Black Christmas, basically, as far as I can tell, was really the very first kind of horror Christmas movie out there. It was directed by Bob Clark. The 1970s version was directed by Bob Clark, who directed A Christmas Story, the classic 24-hour TNT version that you know and love. His first Christmas movie was Black Christmas, this horror film. And it has spun off 2 other remakes, which are almost their own different movies that just aren't really remakes because they take some of the stuff from the original Black Christmas and add it to their story, but they expanded the stories. And the last 2 were out in the 2000s. So we're going to cover all 3 of them real quick. The original Black Christmas was a horror film that came out in the 70s that uses the urban legend of the phone call. Woman's getting a perverted phone calls or threatening phone calls. She calls the police because she's afraid for her life. The police tap the phone and realize that the phone calls are coming from within the house that she's in. And it might be too late. It means the killer's in the house with her. So they decided to take that sort of urban myth, urban legend, and add it to a sorority house in a college campus at Christmas time. And it was kind of it came out around the same time as Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So that was, you could conceivably make that as like the first kind of slasher sort of gore film. And Black Christmas doesn't really have a lot of gore, but it does have sort of a slasher aspect to it. And this is all before Halloween in 1970 affected the slasher genre. So we've had these other horror movies that are the precursors to Halloween. The most scary thing about Black Christmas, the original one, is, spoiler alert, it doesn't quite end how you expect. And that kind of maybe sets up how Halloween ends as well. You might be a little disappointed in the ending. At the same time, it seems like it's the perfect ending for a nihilist society that we're in. That's all I'm going to say about it because I don't want to ruin it for you. Now, fast forward to the 2000s, early 2000s, James Wong, who worked on X-Files and was part of the Final Destination crew, and also did the wonderful Millennium Season 2 saga season, did a remake of Black Christmas. And he used kind of the same general idea, but he added a whole bunch of other more gory attacks, more a different sort of, it was after the Scream movies, so added a little bit of a Scream logic, a sort of a Scream feeling to it because Scream was so popular. So it's not quite a remake of the original one. It has the same name, same general idea. Christmas time, people getting threatening phone calls, sorority house, but there's a different aspect to it that is not found in the first one. So this is one of the first only like sort of the remakes of horror movies where they sort of go in a different tangent. Most times they just do almost a by rote remake with some changes here, like the RoboCop remake. They had to dial down the violence and the satire and make it more into a generic action film that fit the PG-13 window. So that's kind of, they follow the same basic story for the most part, but they had to make some changes there. This is almost a completely different story, and could be considered its own standalone film and not really a remake of Black Christmas from the 1970s, though it does share similar DNA. And then the next one, the third one that came out, which is like 2016, 2017, is even more fucked up, that it has absolutely almost nothing to do with threatening phone calls, but it does have sorority girls. But now they're dealing with fraternity guys during the in the 2016s when the women were talking out, standing up for their rights against males trying to rape them and stuff like that. I forget the name of that. So it was sort of for that generation. So the women are being accosted by these fraternity ass fucks, and they discover some really wicked black magic shit with a black goo sort of thing is controlling. It's a real fucked up, bizarre horror film, and is really only Black Christmas in name and really has nothing to do with the previous two films. I mean, at least the middle one that James Wong did, was he still kept sort of the sorority and the color in the house, but he added his own little take to it. This is like almost completely ignoring all that and creating something else entirely, but still calling it Black Christmas. So, I mean, that's why I have that as my first honorable mention, is those three versions. The next one is slowly becoming a genre of itself. Next one is Fat Man. Mel Gibson plays Santa Claus, a more not psychotic Santa Claus, but a Santa Claus that Christmas is not quite as it is. This is again like a 21st century film. I think it came out in the 20s actually, 2021, something like that. And so in order to keep the money sort of coming in, Santa has started working for the government and is doing some like top secret work for them and stuff like that. But that's not really, that's just sort of the basis to get kind of the pieces in play. The main idea about it is that it sort of is, despite Mel Gibson being cast in it, who is one of the most terrible human beings out there, with his racism and his abusive attitude, stuff like that. They're sort of making a statement about rich people in America. A young, rich, punk ass kid who has been getting coal in his stockings for being a shitbag decides that you can't do this to me because I'm rich. So he hires a hitman to kill Santa Claus. Now, the hitman that he hires has his own beef with Santa, so takes the job gleefully, and then makes his way somehow, I guess, using his military contacts in secret to make his way up to the North Pole and attacks Santa Claus and the North Pole business, trying to assassinate Santa Claus. So then it becomes sort of an action film with guns flying and stuff like that. And it's a different take on it. And again, it has some Christmas aspects to it, but I think only one or two sequences actually takes place on Christmas. The actual assassination attempt is a few weeks before Christmas. So it's technically, you could maybe consider it not a Christmas movie, but when the main character is Santa Claus, you kind of have to. So that's why Fat Man is honorable mention. Now we get to the good stuff. Excuse me. At the 15-minute mark, number 50, Deck the Halls, stars Danny DeVito and Matthew Broderick, who play neighbors who are highly competitive and who are trying to outdo each other with a Christmas display. You're going to notice that that's kind of, again, like I said, with Fat Man, is a genre unto itself. A lot of Christmas movies follow similar plot lines to open up the comedy as well as the conflict, and then allows for the opening at the end of the movie when the Christmas miracle happens, which is a part of making a movie a Christmas movie, is you have to have a Christmas miracle happen. And it doesn't have to be anything hugely miraculous. I will give you, I just have to do this. I just give you a quick spoiler for Fat Man, is the assassin actually is able to kill Santa Claus. But because he's immortal, because he's Santa Claus, he comes back to life. And so that can be construed as the Christmas miracle. And the kid gets his comeuppance as well. And that can be construed as the miracle in that movie. Again, Black Christmas doesn't really have a miracle, but you can still call it a Christmas movie because it is horror movie set at Christmas time. Now, as I said, on these lists, the majority of them, there's going to be some sort of miracle that happened, but it doesn't have to be anything like crazy, outlandish miracle stuff. It can be anything the slightest. Like the good example is A Christmas Story. Ralphie gets his BB gun. That can be considered as a miracle. Home Alone, his parents come back in time for Christmas. I'm spoiling all this stuff, but you've probably seen these by now. His parents come back in time for Christmas, and he successfully defends his house from criminals. So stuff like that. That's considered what makes the Christmas movie a Christmas movie. And Deck the Halls, of course, is going to have one of those because you have to. You can't have a dark humored, well, you can, and that's one coming up a little bit later, but it still keeps sort of that Christmas charm to it. And you're going to have sort of a conclusion that's successful for all parties, and everything sort of works out in the end. Deck the Halls is not a really great movie. It's still an entertaining watch. And a lot of these, as I said, this is the later one. So a lot of these are not my particularly favorites, but they are worth mentioning and worth checking out because this is just my opinion. You might find something a little bit more humorous. Like I know one of these on this list is one of my brother-in-law's favorite movies that he likes to watch all the time. So I'm not the biggest fan of it, but if he likes it, hey, that's perfect. Go for it. So Deck the Halls is number 50, but it does have Danny DeVito and Matthew Broderick in it. So pretty decent cast with that. Number 49 is Christmas with the Cranks. You think with Tim Allen, who made a successful Santa Claus series, coming back to Christmas would be a big deal. You team him up with Jamie Lee Curtis. You think that's going to be a good deal. You make and it's an adaptation of a John Grisham Christmas novel, which is, John Grisham is an interesting writer because he writes mostly those law thrillers like The Firm and Pelican Brief and The Client and stuff like that. But he has written nonfiction books. He has written, particularly around the holidays, he writes uplifting Christmas. This one isn't really uplifting, but does write Christmas style stories that has nothing to do with lawyers, has written a baseball book that has nothing to do with lawyers, stuff like that. So he likes to stretch out his writing every once in a while, which is perfect for a writer. You don't want, if you want to stay as like a Stephen King, here's the thing with Stephen King. He's a horror writer, but he's also expanded into a whole bunch of different areas. James Patterson has expanded into a whole bunch of different areas. It's the general sort of same presence, but he tries different aspects of things. Michael Crichton went into different. So it's good to keep your writing. Now, you can write the same thing over and over again, and if you're successful, hey, that's perfect. That's wonderful. But at the same time, you might like to spread out. So you think that with all that in there, and even an appearance by Dan Aykroyd, that this movie would be a lot better than it is. And it honestly isn't. It's slightly better than Deck the Halls because Deck the Halls has a bit of a a mean streak to it. And I'm not particularly fond of those types of things. Christmas with the Cranks is just kind of a really kind of bizarre sort of film that you have to look at as like, would this really happen in reality? The Cranks are the most Christmassy couple you've ever heard of. They have a daughter who's getting ready to move out on her own, and they're going to finally be empty nesters. But up until that point, they wanted to make a spectacular Christmas display every year. The neighborhood and the town that they live in expects it of them every year. And it's like the Macy's Day Parade. Every year they say, "I can't wait to see what the Cranks are going to do with their decorations this year," or "I can't wait to see what when they get their decorations up." And it gets people excited for the holiday. It gets them motivated to do their own lighting stuff. But this year, with their daughter not being there and them being empty nesters and their lives starting to change now, they're getting older. There's really no reason to do it. So they decide that we're going to take a vacation at Christmas. We've never done that before. Let's take a cruise. Let's just say the hell with just to have the two of us. Let's just say the hell with Christmas. We'll have Christmas on the Caribbean and go, and we could spend Christmas Day on the beach drinking Mai Tais and stuff like that. And of course, we then find out that the daughter wants to come back for Christmas and is expecting the big party and the Christmas decorations. And they get and they're in the airport, they get ready to go to where they need to fly into to go on their cruise. And then they realize, oh shit, we have to do this for our daughter. Meanwhile, the neighborhood's been trying to stop them from leaving because it's like, you can't not do this. You're going to ruin everything. You're going to ruin Christmas. So they come back and try to put together a Christmas miracle like a day or so before their daughter comes back home and gets it in time for Christmas. And the neighbors get kind of pissy with them. It's like, oh, now you decide to come back after they've sort of effectively burned the bridges with them. Again, kind of another sort of little mean streak that doesn't really make a lot of sense why people would freak out that much. I mean, I guess if you have a house that is always decorated crazily and stuff like that, it's a shame when they don't do it. But you got to move on sometimes. It could have been a situation. Maybe one of them got sick. Yes, they know in this case they went on a vacation. Why can't they go on a vacation? They're not beholden to you or anybody. So that's why it's number 49. Again, not one of my favorites. But in the end, the heart is still a little bit more there than it was in Deck the Halls. Though, technically in Deck the Halls, it does eventually come together because of the Christmas miracle, blah, blah, blah. Number 48 is actually a film that I saw on Mystery Science Theater 3000. And it is a Spanish movie, and it is one of the most bizarre movies you're ever going to see. But it is worth mentioning. It is probably better to watch it with the MST3K commentary, because I think if you tried to watch this movie without it, it's going to kind of fuck you up. The movie's called just straight up Santa Claus. That's it, Santa Claus. And the premise is there's a young Spanish girl who's her whole being, her whole life, whatever, is revolved around the fact that she gets a specific doll for Christmas. And Santa knows about this and wants to get the girl the doll so that her life is straight and perfect and wonderful. Satan, yes, the Satan, hears about what's going on with this and says, if we can stop Santa from giving this doll to this young girl, she'll become despondent and potentially maybe I can bargain with her for her soul. Santa's not too keen about hearing about this, so he and Satan end up having a battle over this girl's soul. The reason why it's 48, though, is because it's crazy and it's wild, but it's one of the most original, coolest ideas ever. And remember the sequences, there's a sequence where they're fighting on the rooftops and they're like popping pop, it makes pop noise. So Santa's on one roof, Satan's on the other, and then Satan's like, "I'm gonna jump on you." So he pops over to where Santa is. Santa pops over where Satan was, and they're popping all over these rooftops. And as I said, if you can find the MST3K version of it, I think that's what really made this number 48 for me also, because it's absolutely phenomenal. But the movie itself is one of the most original I've ever seen, but it's also one of the absolutely weirdest ones you've ever seen. And that's the other thing also. Santa Claus itself, movies about Santa Claus is a big, you'll see that in the list as well. It's a huge, it's one of the biggest of all the Christmas movies on the list. There's a ton of stuff about Santa Claus in them. And they're all kind of different in different ways. So that's number 48 is just straight up Santa Claus. Number 47 is Fred Claus. I've never been the biggest Vince Vaughn fan, but I am a fan of Paul Giamatti. And to have Paul Giamatti as Santa Claus is a phenomenal idea. The film is a generic, cliched story about Santa being the perfect child as they were growing up, and Fred being the loser kind of brother to Santa, who, when Santa becomes Santa, has to live with the fact that his brother is one of the most beloved people on the planet and is iconic. And he is just a straight up kind of loser who's jealous of his brother. So sure enough, all heck breaks loose, and Fred has to end up moving back in to help Santa at Christmas time because he does something to try to ruin Christmas, and to pay for it, Santa, his brother, makes him work at the North Pole. But then there is a creepy overseer played by Kevin Spacey who kind of wants to take over and then frames Fred for a huge mistake, and then everybody hates Fred, and he has to turn it into a plus. Santa, I think, might get hurt or something, so Fred has to take the place of Santa. It's interesting, but it's worth it for Paul Giamatti. And again, I'm not the biggest Vince Vaughn fan, but he does his typical sort of Vince Vaughn sort of stuff. So I still like it a little bit better. Paul Giamatti, I think, is the one that really sets this into number 47 ahead of the other ones, but that's kind of why I like it. Vince Vaughn, I can give or take. He pops up a little later in the list as well. Again, 46 is Office Christmas Party, Jason Bateman, Jennifer Aniston. A company finds out that their corporate is going to shut down their office like right after Christmas, and they're all going to lose their jobs and they'll lose their pensions and all this stuff. And they have one chance that they might be able to save the company and save their jobs. There is a CEO of a company or something they're trying to woo for whatever their job in the office is, to try to woo them to join their office, and would be a huge influx of money and would help them save Christmas and save the company. But in order to woo him, the company decides to throw a banger of a Christmas party. And this is another one of these black comedy ones where there's drugs and prostitutes and all. It's surprising that Seth Rogen didn't write this, but it just becomes an absolute bacchanalia to try to convince this CEO to join the office to save their jobs. And it also is a look at inter-office interactions, I guess is the proper word. The guy who has a crush on a girl, it's almost the end of the world, so it must be time, and that he's going to lose his job, might never see her again. So now might be the time for him to step up to tell her how he feels, but she's under the influence of the drugs and the alcohol and all, and there's all kinds of it's a black comedy, kind of one of these sort of American Pie, sex comedy, black comedy sort of movies, and the star power of Jason Bateman and Jennifer Aniston helps. but in the end, it's still and nihilism is going to be the word of the day, a nihilistic look at Christmas, that you realize that, the only way you can really save anything is if you ply it with drugs and alcohol and sex. It's okay. And as I said, it's a little bit better because of the star power, and it is kind of a goofy idea. And it's also a different type of Christmas story, because most Christmas movies have a specific storyline that they follow. They make variations of it. This one is sort of similar. Company tries to, get back, not lose their jobs. They have to come up with like a miracle, a Hail Mary play to save themselves. And the result is Office Christmas Party. Number 45, a lot of people are probably going to yell at me because I know this is a lot of people's favorite movies, but I'm not the biggest fan of these. Bad Santa 1 and 2, Billy Bob Thornton playing a drunk, sexually perverse department store Santa, who he and his elf, and I think he usually hooks up with somebody else, get a job at this mall and do mall Santa stuff, and then work after the mall shuts down for Christmas to steal stuff from that and move on and take and steal stuff on Christmas Eve night after everything's shut down, and then move on to the next mall, sort of thing. But because they are all criminals, there's distrust between the elf and Santa, even though they've been working together for a long time, but there's still always going to be sort of distrust. And the elf is really kind of the brains behind everything. And Billy Bob's is one of these lecherous drinker things. So if a pretty girl comes up to him and he thinks he's going to be able to fuck her, he's going to just spend all of his time trying to get into her pants. And he's also a booze hound, stuff like that. So the elf is planning on, finally maybe cutting ties with him after this one big heist, and then taking his part too and moving on with someone else and getting him busted. But then the bad Santa gets caught up in the life of a poor bullied boy who comes to him for guidance. And I think he's trying to get into the mom's pants, so he agrees to help the kid it's been a while since I've seen them, so I think it's sort of similar like that. Tries to take on the bullies, and then the sequel sort of continues sort of the similar storyline, but it takes place many years later. So the idea of a scummy, sexually perverse, drunk Santa Claus, his elf who's a master thief sort of thing, is an interesting premise, but again, it's a black sex comedy sort of thing, and there's a lot of those also, and using Santa as sort of the bait is kind of a cliche aspect of it, but it still makes, I guess, for an entertaining movie for some people. I just was not a big fan of it. I don't know. I guess that's why a lot of these dark humored ones are, back here in the 50s and 40s, because I like my Christmas movies more along the lines of the hopeful, family oriented sort of stuff. There's a few exceptions, obviously. But in the end, I'm just not the biggest fan of these more darker Christmas stories, and that's just me. Number 44 is Santa Claus versus the Martians. My friend Lisa, she does a annual snarking of it, where she and her group of people, they watch it at like the week before Christmas and just tweet about it and snark about it. And it is a classic black and white film. It's actually also makes an appearance in the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special, which is the best Christmas special of all time, in my opinion. It is iconic with what's her name? It's a young woman who is a girl, and this one ends up becoming a sex pot a little later in the 80s. But the general premise, it's a black and white B movie, and I also think MST3K might have done a snarking on this also, but I don't quote me on that. I know they did Santa Claus. I don't know if they did Santa Claus versus the Martians, but it's a B movie where Martians want to bring Christmas to Mars because they've been spying on Earth and seeing how cheerful and jolly it is, and they need that for their planet. So they abduct Santa and try to have him bring Christmas to Mars for the Martians. And he does. And then when he tries to leave, they say, you can't go. And he's got to figure out a way to get out of that. That's the basic premise of it. It's a classic B movie. As I said, Lisa Marie absolutely loves it, and she does an annual viewing of it every year. It's probably her most popular because she does views every week of the year. A movie watches, actually does it for the whole weekend, and gets people to come and tweet about stuff like that. This is probably her favorite and her most popular one. It is a decent B movie, but it is still a B movie from the 1950s and 60s. So the acting is wooden. The set design is mediocre. The story is light. It doesn't have meat, but it is a Christmas movie. Santa Claus versus the Martians, number 44. Number 43 is Santa Claus the movie. I forget who there was a producer who wanted to, now after the success of Superman, I think it was Salkand, I guess, wanted to make a typical big special effects mid 1980s sort of movie about Santa Claus. And using with the 80s was the arrival of more visual effects. You know, Superman came out in 78 and sort of changed the scope of everything. And then Steven Spielberg came in and did Close Encounters. George Lucas did Star Wars. And then before you know it, visual effects just sort of takes over everything. So we get a producer who wants to make a high-priced, huge extravaganza about Santa Claus. Why not? Let's do like a Santa Claus type of movie. It's a Christmas movie. Should make a ton of money. And we have special effects. So we do all this kind of stuff. But it doesn't quite work. It's also at the same time as trying to make a comment about society at the time in the 1980s. In Santa Claus the movie, Santa Claus now is sort of a automatic sort of like a making cars sort of thing. It's got like a toy line. It's got a line that does the stuff. It's sort of lost its flavor and whatever. So an elf played by Dudley Moore gets kind of tired of this, so he wants to get a different job. So he ends up working for an unscrupulous business person who wants to change Christmas into something else and lose the heart of it. And Dudley Moore's elf character unwittingly helps out with it, but then he has to try to figure out how to save the day. John Lithgow's in it also, but it is a high budget extravaganza that in the end has really no heart and is not that great of a movie, but it's number 43 because at least they were trying to do a huge extravaganza. They wanted to play with the special effects to see what they could actually get away with and see if they could make what I think they were trying to hope for was a definitive Santa Claus movie. It didn't quite work, but it's still now, I think, considered a cult classic. I haven't watched it for at least 20 some years, so maybe it's time to do a rewatch to see how bad it actually is now. It was trying to do a lot, and it just didn't succeed. Number 42 is a more recent one. It actually came out this year. It was supposed to start off originally as an Amazon Prime, direct Amazon Prime film, just release it there and nowhere else. But then they decided last year, 2023, when they were looking at the barren schedule of 2024 due to the strikes and stuff like that, they said, what do we got to lose by releasing it in movie theaters for a few weeks? See if we make see, it might be a huge hit. We've got two big stars in it. It's a Christmas movie. Why don't we see? It's an action film. It's a comedy. Let's see if we can sort of recoup it was like 150, $250 million budget, something like that. Movie is Red One. The Rock, Chris Evans, and J.K. Simmons. J.K. Simmons is Santa Claus, which is funny because he voices a version of Santa Claus in the movie Klaus, which we'll talk about in tomorrow's episode. But here he's playing a bulked up Santa Claus, and The Rock is like his bodyguard to make sure that he's safe and sound, stuff like that. But something happens, and Santa Claus gets kidnapped, and they have to find him before Christmas is ruined. So they go to the naughty list and find the best tracker in the world, who's also kind of a bitch, bastard, asshole, played by Chris Evans, to help them find Santa Claus. And the people who have kidnapped him are throwing everything they can at them to stop them from trying to save Santa. It's a typical action comedy Christmas film. The Rock's popularity has slowly declined, and he's basically doing what he always does, plays the same exact role. And let's be fair, also, Chris Evans is also kind of playing the same role. Captain America was a role where he was playing a different type of role than he usually does, but Chris Evans started off, remember, as the sarcastic, snarky type of guy from like Not Another Teen Movie and The Human Torch and The Loser, stuff like that. He was always the snarky sort of know-it-all, loudmouth, bastard sort of type. And then after he plays Captain America, who's the most noble, proper, perfect person, he's gone back and has played similar roles in his last few movies, and he's sort of doing the same thing here again. So the movie itself is kind of a dud. It's a passable Christmas film to watch. Again, that's why it's on the list. I mean, all these, even though there are problems with them, they're still fun if you want to do a marathon or whatever, and you haven't seen any of these before, just to check it out on your own and make your own decisions upon it. It didn't do that great in the movie theaters, but once they put on Amazon for good, it hit 50 million views in the first weekend alone, which was a record for Amazon. So that might be enough for a potential sequel. So we'll see. Props also go to it that you bring in Krampus and killer snowmen who attack you. That was done pretty good, but the film itself is just kind of a bloated mess. But again, it's a fun Christmassy action adventure that doesn't hurt anybody and entertaining, and has two actors who are basically playing the same roles they always do, but they're really good when they're playing those roles. Number 41 is The Bad Moms Christmas. This is actually the sequel to Bad Moms. Bad Moms was a female sex comedy that starred Mila Kunis, Catherine Hahn, and I forget who the other bad mom is. But they play women who are in various areas of relationships and stuff like that. And it goes to show you that men aren't the only ones that can do sex comedies. Women can do them as well. And the bad moms work together to take down the prissy mom sort of thing. And it became a hugely good, popular movie that they decided to spin it off into a Christmas movie. The sequel's a Christmas movie, and that's where we are right here, Bad Mom Christmas. And it makes most sense where they decide to go with it in the sequel. You've got to know these women in the first one. So now you get to see where they came from as their mothers, who are the original bad moms, come to town for the holidays and come in and upend their lives. Again, another kind of cliched Christmas type story. But again, is a Christmas movie set at Christmas time, has Christmas themes, Christmas everything, and is another one of these sort of dark sex comedy sort of things that, while enjoyable to watch, is not ones that I would keep going back to every year and say, I'm going to watch this on an annual basis. When we get to like my top 25, maybe my top 10, top 15, these are movies that I can watch over and over and over again. These are ones that I can watch once every few years. If I want to try something different, I might watch it. And then maybe like 5 years later, it's like, you know what? Let's try something different. get in the spirit of things and pop it in there. Bad Moms, again, is a very passable movie. It's got great female casts, and it's good to see women able to do films that most times, men are only supposed to be doing these sex comedies, because women are sexual also, and it's good to see them sort of bringing that out in here. And again, great casts and stuff like that. And there you go with that one. Number 40 is man, we're really going on a streak of some of these like drugs, sex, alcohol, dark comedy sort of things. Next up is a very Harold and Kumar Christmas, which is the third one of the Harold and Kumar saga. Harold and Kumar play two best friends who spend all their days smoking weed and goofing off and doing stuff. But Harold is played by John Cho, is a guy who wants to advance in his career. He eventually finds somebody and ends up getting married to them, and starts a family. And so he and Kumar start separating because he's got to deal with his family. Kumar, meanwhile, sort of in a daze, doesn't quite know exactly what he wants to do with himself. They befriended Neil Patrick Harris, who plays himself, a different version of him. You all know Neil Patrick Harris as the funny, gay, happy-go-lucky magician, musician, fun type of guy who's sweet and kind. This Neil Patrick Harris in the Harold and Kumar movies is the worst possible version of Neil Patrick Harris. Think Barney from How I Met Your Mother, but not Barney was, the stud sort of playa, but he also had morals in some aspects as well. Think of it as a no morals player who loves pissing on prostitutes and drinking and doing drugs and sleeping around and just being a total utter fuckwad. And Neil Patrick Harris had an absolute blast playing the worst possible version of himself who interacts with these two. So after the second one, it's been a few years before the third one came out, and by that time things are starting to settle down a little bit. And at this point, Kumar and Harold are estranged and haven't really had a chance, don't really want to deal with each other, but something pops up which brings them back together, and they have to deal with the Russian mafia and has to deal with finding the perfect Christmas tree sort of thing. So it is a drug-fueled, not as much sex comedy, but there's some aspects of that as well. Neil Patrick Harris makes an appearance in here again, but he died in the second one, didn't he? He's back, and how he comes back is another reason why this movie is blasphemous and stuff like that. But at the same time, it is one of the more funnier drug, sex-fueled, teen comedy sort of things. Though this one is showing Harold and Kumar much older, starting to get into their life a little bit more and trying to sweep away the old them and try to create new ones. But when they get back together and the stress and the anxiety they go through, they tend to go back to their old stylings. But at the end, there's, as always, a miracle, blah, 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 and things, get better. But that's what number 40 is, a very Harold and Kumar Christmas. Number 39 goes back to the Wayback Machine. And the 80s was good about bringing up kind of weird characters who popped up in TV shows and movies and stuff like that. Pee Wee Herman is a good example of that. And we also have Ernest P. Worrell, played by Jim Varney, who's had a number of hugely popular family films. Ernest Goes to Camp, Ernest Goes to Jail. There's other, I can't remember. There's like 4 or 5 Ernest movies. And one of them is Ernest Saves Christmas. And that's number 39 on my list. And basically, the premise behind this is, again, another cliched Christmas movie story is Santa Claus needing to find a replacement because it is time for him to move on. And that's what happens here. He is looking for a replacement, and he has a pretty good idea who he wants to get, but he's not able, for whatever reason, to access this person. So Ernest P. Worrell runs into him, into Santa Claus, and because he's such a kind, gentle soul and likes to do stuff, and he's a goofy guy, he says he will gladly help Santa try to get this guy to accept the job of the new Santa Claus and get him to even sit down and talk to him. And from that point on, everything goes as they're trying to get this guy to be a face-to-face with Santa, but there are things that are put up in their way, so they can't get this person for whatever reason. And Ernest, through his typical Ernest self, is able to finesse through things and walk through the raindrops, because that's what Ernest P. Worrell does. And that's how he saves Christmas. It's a cute, as I said, cute family film. The Ernest P. Worrell movies there's nothing wrong with them. They've got goofy humor. They've got some, farting and pee-pee jokes and stuff like that, but no really bad, awful humor. Even Ernest Goes to Jail wasn't that bad. And it's more, it's similar sort of a Pee Wee Herman sort of thing, where it's sort of a kind of just a bizarre character who is actually, in the end, also one of the sweetest and nicest characters as well. And Jim Varney does a fantastic job as it. So Ernest Saves Christmas is number 39. Number 38 is Last Holiday. Queen Latifah discovers that she has a brain tumor and doesn't have a long time to live. So she decides that she may as well spend her last Christmas or last holiday enjoying life. And I think she goes to like a beach resort where it turns out that her crush, who she's been crushing on, also happens to be there also. And she has to sort of wrestle with the ideas that I would love to get with him, but it wouldn't be for a long time because I'm going to die here. But it just goes, but she just, it's a way for this woman who realizes that she's going to die very soon. And she hasn't lived life to just say, fuck it, I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want until I die. So in that way, you get a cheerful, upbeat sort of story, but underlying is this storyline that she ain't going to make it. And that sort of fights against each other in the movie, and why it's number 38, not higher, because it's a fine movie. It has a good message, is to live your life, no matter what. You shouldn't put off, and that's the thing I keep trying to tell people: take your paid time off, take breaks, take breathers, don't overwork yourself. It's not worth it. You're going to kill yourself. And yes, she is not literally killing herself. It's a brain cancer thing that she has no control over, but she did not live life until she learned she didn't have much of it left. So you have that underlying sort of depressing thing, but at the same time, you have this really upbeat, cheerful sort of thing. And that's almost another exact idea of what a Christmas movie kind of is. The fact of the matter is, majority of it takes place at this beach resort sort of thing. So you could make a case that it's not quite a Christmas movie, but it's close enough because of the themes that it has for it. And so Last Holiday is decent. The miracle is, I guess it makes sense, and you can probably figure it out early on. But at the end of the film, it doesn't matter because the themes are still the same and the message is still the same. Live life, don't burn yourself out. And I keep telling people, you got to do this. Fuck what your bosses say. Fuck what the company says. You've got to worry about yourself. Yes, you need to keep your job so you have money to pay for things: food, heat, your house, your home, clothes, stuff for your kids or yourself or whatever. But you should not be forced into servitude to them and just live your whole life working and coming home and not doing anything with your life, not taking your time off, not taking your breathers, not taking shit. from your bosses. And I know it's easy for me to say on this side. And look, I'm that type of person that I work my ass off, but I've come to the realization that I need to take my time off. I need to take my breaks because I just suffered through this year through a kidney stone outbreak. And I'm not saying that that was caused to because of my job, but it certainly aggravated it. So the message is clear, but the miracle sort of throws it out of whack a little bit. But it still is a statement. We're now getting to number 37, the most depressing movie on the list, but it's also number 37 because it is depressing, because it is a slightly different take on the Christmas movie. And it's also one of the things that not a lot happens, but it's kind of a fucked up story. It's a British film called Silent Night. Came out recently. And it stars the actor who played Jojo and Jojo Rabbit. It also has Keira Knightley. And the premise is it's Christmas Eve, and a family is getting together at a house for Christmas dinner. Atypical sort of what you expect to do at Christmas Eve, Christmas Day sort of thing. However, here's the depressing part. However, the news is reporting that there is a massive outbreak of a terminal cloud, a cloud that is a poison cloud that is spreading across the world right now. And once it enters your area, you're dead. It is a fast-moving, poisonous cloud that will kill you instantly when it reaches you. So this family is meeting for the last time because the cloud is heading towards them. Everyone is depressed and sad because their lives are getting ready to end. And that in turn causes stuff to happen. Emotions are high, stuff that you've kept hidden. You've been loving this person from afar, and you've never told them. You're having an affair with someone but never said anything. You're a controlling asshole, and I just stayed married with you because I had no other option. So all this bad shit comes out, and it's a totally depressing, sad, unwielding film. But why is it 37, Dylan? Christmas is supposed to be hopeful. Yes, it is supposed to be hopeful. But at the same time, it is a very well acted film. It is a different take on the Christmas movie, where instead of it being a cheerful, light and bright sort of finale you're reaching for, it is a doom and gloom, depressing end of the world, and things get even more haywire as the cloud is getting closer. In retrospect, I probably should have moved it up higher because I'm starting to think about more and more that it is such a depressing movie that I don't know why I have it that high up. But at the same time, it is well worth a shot if you want a completely different take on a Christmas movie. Yes, it's depressing. Yes, it's upsetting, and yes, it's not great for a story standpoint. But that therein lies its strength, is that it makes you uncomfortable. It makes you forget that you're watching a movie. You get ensconced in these people's last moments in their lives, and you start feeling sort of the same things as them. It's like, what if I was facing a similar situation? Who would I be most like at a dinner party like that? Number 37, Silent Night. Again, probably push it up in the 40s somewhere, but I just like the idea of a different take on the Christmas movie. Number 36, Vince Vaughn makes his return to the list. This time, I like him a lot more in this film because he's playing off of a wonderful comedic romantic comedy actress in Reese Witherspoon. It's Four Christmases. Again, it's got a great premise. They're a young couple They don't really have any desire to have kids. They just are. And I know so many people like that, people who are in their 20s and early 30s who don't want to have a family. They just want to, keep their money. They want to live comfortably in their house, in their apartment or whatever. They want to keep buying their lattes and watching their movies and doing their streaming and getting their TikToks and collecting what they collect and using their money for themselves and not anybody else. And then, it's someone that you kind of dig, so you can go and you can fuck each other also whenever you want to. Sort of thing. And you can have a relationship and you can buy presents for somebody. And so every year they make up some reason not to see their families. And they tend to lie somewhat about what they do. In the end, they end up going on vacations. So they like going to like Acapulco or Hawaii or just any just gorgeous place where they can just sit, relax, fuck, drink, smoke, swim, chill, read, get sun, get some sun, get away from the cold weather, just have a blast. So this year is no different, and they're going to the airport, they're ready to go. But a blizzard has blown through, and it's closing, it's shutting down all the flights out. And it just so happened, and so there's lots of backups. So flights are being canceled. People who are trying to travel for Christmas, they can't. So it's a news story. So news reporters are there, and they're interviewing people, and they just happen to interview Reese and Vaughn about what they were and they see them getting ready to go to Hawaii or whatever, and they admit something happened, and then they like get phone calls from their parents like saying, you can come to Christmas now, or we thought you were doing this, but you can come to Christmas now, because they saw them on TV. So now they're like, oh fuck, so okay, let's just bite the bullet. We're not going to be able to go anywhere. Let's just do it this year, and then next year we'll be able to just move on and get back to the way our life is. Let's just suffer through this. So all of them have divorced parents. So they go to like Vince Vaughn's mom first, and they deal with his older brother. I think it's played by Jon Favreau, and the stuff between all that and stuff like that. And Reese has never really seen him interact with his family because they really don't spend a lot of time with their families. And so it starts to show some cracks maybe in their relationship because they're starting to see how they are reacting to family members. And then they go to like Reese's mother's house, and Reese's got a whole nother, now it's her turn to show off some of the cracks in her relationship, stuff like that. Then they go to Vince's dad's, and that becomes where things start really getting really bad between Reese and Vaughn because of just the situations and the stuff that's happening. And eventually I think the two of them split up, and she goes to her dad's house, who is like the only sane one of the family, and is able to kind of convince her to sort of give stuff another chance, stuff like that. And then her and Vaughn get back together and decide it's time to have children and get married and do all this stuff. And it ends on a freaking hilarious, I'm not going to ruin the ending for you, but it is a freaking hilarious ending, which is a call back to what started this whole goddamn thing in the first place. And it is absolutely funny. And you could conceivably make it a sequel if you want to, but For Christmas is a more fun film. Again, as I said, I like Vince Vaughn a little bit better because he plays off of Reese Witherspoon a little bit better than he does otherwise. And then the fact that you have to deal with your parents, and both of you have never really spent much time with your parents recently, and it gives you a look into your partner's life before you, and you and where they're coming from, where they could be going, and you start maybe seeing things that could start causing breaks in the relationship. But if you went right away, like my wife and I think I met her. She has two other sisters. I think I met her two other sisters about almost 3 weeks after we started dating. And then her sister has a birthday in December. So there's a party they always have for them. So I was invited to go to that party. So that was the first time I met her parents. This is about 3 months September 20th, September, October, November, 2.5 months after we started dating. I met her parents. I met her grandparents. I met her aunt and uncles, a couple of her aunts and uncles, and we hung out with the sister, her sisters, and so I learned about them right away. In this case of Vince and Reese, I don't think that they've ever really gone and seen their parents. I'm sure they probably introduced them before, and they might have seen them maybe once or twice, but never spent any actual time around the holidays or whatever because that was not what they wanted to do. So in that case, you can kind of see where when you first get into a relationship, why it's better to bite the bullet and meet the parents on both sides. Because I think my wife met my parents. Couldn't tell you. Maybe Christmas. So it might have been a while before that. And then my sister was pregnant at the time. So I think she first met my sister after she gave birth to my nephew. We went down to see him. And that might have been like the first time she ever met my brother-in-law, my sister. And she's known my nephew, Drew, his whole life. And that's just really weird to me. But in the end, I kind of get this too, is if you are both the same mindset and you don't want, and you're embarrassed by your families, and eventually knowing that it'll bring out the worst in you when you go see them, I can understand why they don't want to do that. So Four Christmases is actually a decent movie. Again, not the biggest Vince Vaughn fan, but he's actually fairly okay in this one. And Reese Witherspoon is absolutely phenomenal in it, and it's great, and I love it. Number 35 is The Night Before. Seth Rogen doing Seth Rogen stuff, but he's also got Anthony Mackie and Joseph Gordon-Levitt involved. So, and it's from the director of 50/50, which was a great movie. So it was fun to see sort of another sort of straight up Christmas comedy that has a little bit of drama thrown into it. But basically, it's about three childhood friends who every Christmas Eve they hang out together and do cool stuff. And then as their life goes on, their friend played by Anthony Mackie becomes like a professional football player, and then Joseph Gordon-Levitt's a successful something, and Seth Rogen's a successful writer or something like that. And he's married and has kids and stuff like that, and one on the way or whatever. And his wife is like his perfect companion because they're both druggies and they like to smoke up and they drink and they party. So Seth Rogen finds like his perfect wife in that, and then Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I think if he says he's either he's sick or dying or something's happening where this is going to have to be maybe their last hangout on Christmas Eve together. Like maybe Seth Rogen's wife. I don't quite, it's been a while since I've seen it. I'm trying to remember. I just remember that they just have a banger again, like Office Christmas Party, have a banger of a Christmas party with drugs and alcohol and women, and they all have to, in effect, have to face their demons in certain aspects. Anthony Mackie's character is hooked on steroids, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, as I said, he's either lonely or, and it's just they're starting to break apart, and he's trying to keep them together. And Seth Rogen's going to become a father. I think his wife is just pregnant with their first kid. So it's just sort of kind of a bizarre, last big party on Christmas Eve, and they wear Christmas sweaters and they do all kinds of crazy stuff, but there's also drugs and alcohol and stuff comes out, and they get mad at each other, and then they come back together, and there's somebody who is sort of an angel who's trying to connect the dots and trying to get them back together and stuff like that. So it's a weird, bizarre kind of little film. But and I probably should have flip-flopped it with Four Christmases. I really like Four Christmases. Night Before, I remember liking it, but just the fact that I don't know as much about it as I do Four Christmases make me think maybe it didn't have as big of an input on me as I thought. But it's a great cast. And again, Seth Rogen's doing Seth Rogen stuff, and that gets kind of annoying after a while. But it's nice to see Anthony Mackie in something else other than The Falcon. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt is always fun to see him getting back into comedies and stuff like that. So Night Before and set on Christmas Eve. I always like stuff that's set on Christmas Eve. I have my own movie idea that I've been trying to write now for close to 20 years, actually more like 30 years. That's set on Christmas Eve also. And every year I started writing it at work, and I got about 16 pages in. And I've just sort of, I haven't gotten back to it because I really haven't, I don't have the desire to do it because now it's getting late for me to do it, but I still want to write it eventually. I want to get the ideas because I think about the idea all the time, particularly around the holidays. Number 34 is another newer one. Came out last year on Amazon also. It's Candy Cane Lane. I think it's Eddie Murphy's first Christmas movie. And he reteams with his director from Boomerang, Reginald Hudlin. And the premise is pretty interesting. And they're using the special effects to its ability. When The Mandalorian came out, they use a new kind of set where they can create a whole village or town or planet in a green screen, and the characters can interact with it and make it look like they're walking in there, but in a three-dimensional. So really, it's a new type of way of getting them ensconced in a special effects sort of window. So they use that sort of similar thing for Candy Cane Lane because because Candy Cane Lane, again, is a father who wants to be the best decorator of Christmas decorations on his house, wants to win a Christmas decorating contest just because it makes him feel better. And he goes all out to try to do it, but he never wins. So he's always trying to up himself every year. So he's like, this year I really got to do it. And his family's really starting to get annoyed with it a little bit, but he says, I need to do this for myself. So he is somehow able to make the acquaintance of a elf, and the elf grants him a wish. And his wish was like, I want to win the Christmas decorating contest in my neighborhood. And the elf, who's kind of mischievous because he's a mischievous elf, or she's a mischievous elf, says, okay, sure. And ends up sending him the entire 12 days of Christmas as his decorations, which, if you think about it, 12 drummers drumming, 11 pipers piping, 10 lords a leaping, 9 ladies dancing, 8 maids a milking, 7 swans a swimming, 6 geese a laying, 5 gold rings, 4 calling birds, 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree, all coming at one time, is going to disrupt the neighborhood Christmas. And so he's got to figure out a way to stop that while also still trying to win the competition, even though it's his fault that his neighborhood is now overrun by all this stuff. It's a clever film, not the best film in the world, but it's a fun watch. It's an interesting one to watch, and it's always good to see Eddie Murphy, even in his later years, doing something that he's really never done before, and it's kind of interesting and see him get back into sort of this sort of mode. So Candy Cane Lane is number 34. Number 33 is a film you've never heard of before, based on a graphic novel you've never read before, and I'd never heard of it before until I worked at Diamond. And it became a tradition for me in the mid 2000s, 2010s to like 2015, 16. I used to do this all the time. And they made a movie of it. And even though it is not a Christmas movie per se, it is a Christmas tradition by the Italians. It's The Feast of Seven Fishes, which is a movie. It's also The Feast of the Seven Fishes is the name of the movie. It's the name of the graphic novel is based on. But the graphic novel is basically a biography of the comic book artist writer who grew up in an Italian family who wanted to make a graphic novel about this Italian tradition where on Christmas Eve, a typical Italian Christmas meal. Again, not every Italian does this, but a lot of them do. It is 7 courses of fish. And that could be, it could be, fish hors d'oeuvres, fish soups, sardines in a salad, a fish fillet. But it's all about different types of fish and different recipes you can use to make that feast. And so this is just basically a autobiographical story about how an Italian guy brings his new girlfriend to the Feast of the Seven Fishes for the first time to introduce her to his Italian traditions. And that's really kind of the premise of it. I mean, it's a sweet film, and it takes place on Christmas Eve, and that's when the feast. But it's also an introduction to a really interesting tradition that you don't have to be Italian to deal with. Now, I didn't quite go all out as they did. In fact, the book that I had, the graphic novel, the book has recipes in it for stuff like that. It also explains in detail in the comic book how they prepare the stuff, but the storyline is still intertwined in that. And the movie, rightfully just focuses on the story arc, but the book itself has all these, recipes. I didn't use any of them, but then I decided to come up with my own version of it. It's not quite 7 feasts of the fishes, but I got goldfish crackers as like a hors d'oeuvre sort of thing. We had like, crab melt sort of things as an appetizer. I did salmon on the grill. We did like a typical salad. Doesn't have like a fish aspect to it, but we did typical salad and potatoes. And I did seafood mac and cheese, where I put shrimps and scallops and crab meat and fish meat and stuff like that into a macaroni and cheese, and eat it that way. So it's not, I didn't quite do a 7 day, seven Feast of the Seven Fishes, but I did do a couple of fish stuff as well. And because the actual Feast of Seven Fishes is a meal that takes at least 3 days to work on to get it just right. And I didn't have the time for that. I just wanted to do something similar in films. I thought it was great. And then that sort of dissipated. And I'm going to an Italian restaurant on Christmas Eve this year. So I don't know if they're going to do anything similar to that, and see if they have like any specials. And they might do that. It would be really cool if they did. But again, it's not a regular tradition, but it's still a fun one. And they did make a movie about it, and it's entertaining. It's called Feast of the Seven Fishes. It's number 33. Oh, I love that tea. So good. We're almost done here. We're down to the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the top 7 of this list. So we should be done probably in the next 15 minutes. So we'll be done probably just about 9:45 p.m. Thank you for watching, as you still do. Number 32 is Last Christmas. Yes, that has nothing to do with Wham or Whamageddon. And again, kind of cliche movie. You can probably figure out the twist at the end while you're watching the movie, but it's still an entertaining film and a pretty decent cast. It's got Emilia Clarke, Emma Thompson, and Michelle Yeoh in it. And the basic premise is a young woman played by Emilia Clarke, who's sort of lost in her world or whatever, is not sure what she wants to do with her life, and just sort of wandering aimlessly. She's had health issues. She's had drug issues and drinking issues. So she's now works as a sales associate at a 365-day Christmas shop run by Michelle Yeoh's character, who is an absolute Christmas fanatic. And so it's one of those shops. If you go down to the beach, on the way down the beach to Ocean City, there's one. In North Carolina, there's one. It's a Christmas store. It's open all year round, and it's all just Christmas stuff. So she works in one of those. So her life is aimless. She's not treated well at work, though. Michelle Yeoh is not awful to her, but she's also very straightforward and very, giving it to you as it is. She doesn't have any filter or whatever. She just lets you know you look like shit or something like that, but I still like you, that sort of thing. She does so Emilia Clarke's just losing her way around, doesn't know exactly what she's doing with her life, and just sort of wandering in and out, and is contemplating different things, not sure what she wants to do, when she runs into a young man who sort of gets her motor running again with his kindness, his sweet talk, and he's a handsome young man. And they start talking, and he shows her around different places. He shows her a homeless shelter that he works at, and she sort of gets kind of drunk on him and kind of want to wants to hook up with him, but he's sort of like, no, no, well, I'll see you when I see you, and then just departs. And she starts thinking about things, and she starts thinking like, maybe if I clean myself up, maybe he'll want to like me more. So she decides to do a better job. So she tries to do a better job working her job. She ends up going to the homeless shelter trying to find this guy, and they've never really heard of him before. And so, but she still ends up working there and ends up, bringing love and happiness to people. And she starts getting off on that and starts realizing that she can be good. So she starts doing more and more good while still trying to impress this man who pops in and out of her life periodically, kind of when she needs it the most, where she's down at her lowest or she's having a crisis of faith or whatever. He pops up and lets her, know everything's okay and good. And she also helps Michelle Yeoh find a perfect boyfriend, a guy who's just obsessed with Christmas as much as she is. So that sort of thing. So she plays matchmaker. She does a better job of connecting with her mother, I think played by Emma Thompson, and tries to be a better person all around. From my description, you can probably figure out the twist, but I didn't fully tell you I didn't fully tell you everything, so you might not be able to tell what the twist is, but you can probably have a general idea what the twist is. And it's again kind of a decent idea. It's been done before. It's been kind of cliched, but that's kind of what you want in a Christmas movie. Now, as I said, also you don't want to just see every movie be the same story. Silent Night, hence like that. So if I talk to you about Santa Claus that are totally outlandish, crazy stories you never would have expected, but it's still nice to see kind of a cliche Christmas movie because that's what a Christmas movie is. In the end that there's going to be conflict, and then there's going to be something that brings everybody together, and then a miracle is going to save everything. And it makes you feel good because it gives you hope. And Last Christmas is a really good, much like Last Holiday, where it says that if you don't, what's the line from Ferris Bueller? If you don't stop and look around a little bit, life moves really fast. If you don't stop and look around, you might miss it. Something like that. It's a great John Hughes line. I believe it's from Ferris Bueller. Yeah, because one of the other ones about is risky business. Sometimes you just gotta say what the fuck or whatever, or who gives a fuck, or I don't give a fuck, or something like that. So those are two really good things. But Last Christmas is one of those, like Last Holiday, where it's sort of saying, don't burn yourself out, don't get into yourself emotionally into bad areas. Try to expand by helping others, and you will feel much better. That type of thing. Or live your life more fully, which is sort of a similar storyline. So Last Christmas is number 32. I talked about the genre of violent Santa Clauses, which is a kind of a brand new one. We have Fat Man, and then we have Violent Night at number 31. I like Violent Night a lot better because it is a funnier action comedy Christmas movie. David Harbour is found fantastic as Santa Claus, and basically becomes a straight up action film where a sort of surly Santa Claus played by Dave Harbour, who does have a little bit of a drinking problem also, is tasked to save a young woman, a young girl and her family who have been kidnapped or being held hostage by like terrorists or something, because it's like a very important, that her father is like a very important person. And so they're being held hostage. So he has to go in and take down the hostage. Basically Die Hard if John McClane was Santa Claus for real. And he has to go in and take out the terrorists who have held this family hostage. It's a fun film, and David Harbour's having a blast playing the role. You can just tell he had so much fun doing this movie. And I like it more than Fat Man because Fat Man was a little bit more dark and nihilistic, and I'm not a big fan of Mel Gibson anymore. And it's shot kind of creepily. This is more of a straight up what you kind of want in an action Santa film. And as I said, you can maybe put Red One in that sort of Santa kick-ass sort of mode, even though he doesn't really do much in this one. But J.K. Simmons looks like he can absolutely tear your head off of your body if you want to. Violent Night's a great, fun little film. again, if you just want something brainless and just something entertaining to watch, and you don't want your typical sort of Christmas, stuff, check out Violent Night. It's actually really good. And it did so well that a sequel is in the works. David Harbour actually posed for a picture this week, or last week, I would say, with the Violent Night 2 script in his hand. So it's done. And they're probably going to start filming it this year since he just finished Stranger Things. He's probably going to start filming it this winter, and it'll probably be out in theaters by end of the year. Because there's not a lot of special effects. It's a straight up action film, which you can blow out pretty easily. The stunts will be the most biggest thing to do. And there's going to be some visual effects stuff you need to do, but it also depends on what the storyline is as well. You can't really repeat what you're doing. So we'll see what happens. But Violent Night, number 31. Speaking of action films, Arnold Schwarzenegger appears in his first Christmas movie. But it's not an action comedy. It's a straight up comedy. One of the best things that Arnold Schwarzenegger ever did was signing on to Twins with Danny DeVito, directed by Ivan Reitman. Because up to that point, he had only been known as a straight up action guy who did these corny one-liners and stuff like that. And Twins gave you a look at how good Arnold Schwarzenegger actually is. He goes against his type. He doesn't play a rough and tumble tough guy. He plays the most virginal, sweet, kindest person who just so happens to look like fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Danny DeVito is playing Danny DeVito. He plays a slime ball shitbag, and the two of them become twins. And that showed that Schwarzenegger can do comedy, can do other types of films besides action films. That came on and continued as Ivan Reitman also cast him in Kindergarten Cop, which is probably, of all the comedies he did with Ivan Reitman, Kindergarten Cop is probably the best one. Because DeVito's not in, nothing against DeVito, but this was an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, but it was also an action comedy, romantic comedy. You gave Arnold a chance to be more of a kind of romantic lead. You have a little bit of action, but the majority, and that's only really at the beginning and at the end of the movie. The majority of the movie is him teaching kindergarten kids and just the whole fish out of water sort of thing like that, which plays in that. And then he did the awful Junior, where he was the world's first pregnant man, which has its moments, but is not one of my favorites. So Schwarzenegger proved he could do comedy. So sure enough, you fast forward to about 97, I guess. He's done these three movies: Junior, Kindergarten Cop, and Twins. And Last Action Hero is kind of a comedy, but more of an action aspect of it, but it still has that sort of weird don't know quite what you're going with. So he decided to sign on to a movie called Jingle All the Way, and that's number 30 for you. It's kind of a Home Alone-esque sort of movie, just from the pratfalls and the goofiness that happens. The premise itself is Arnold Schwarzenegger is married to Rita Wilson, go figure, who's Tom Hanks' wife in real life, and they have a son. And the only thing the son wants, it's actually his son is Anakin Skywalker, to be honest. He was the young actor who played Anakin Skywalker. The only thing the kid wants for Christmas is this action figure. So flashback to when Cabbage Patch Kids came out, the hottest toy in the world, and people were fighting each other to get Cabbage Patch Kids, and they were selling out faster than they were able to get inventory back in. So people were put on wait lists, and people were freaking out, and other people were selling their Cabbage Patch Kids for like $5,000, stuff like that. And people were paying it because their kids wanted the next hugely popular character. Beanie Baby is a similar sort of thing. So there's always going to be one of these toys that, and this is more of an 80s and 90s thing, not so much nowadays where that happens, but it's going to be like sort of the 80s and 90s where this sort of happens. And in this case, it was an action figure. So Arnold thinks he can go out like on Christmas Eve and get it. But in the end, he realizes it is one of the toughest action figures, one of the hottest toys. Nobody has it, so he's got to keep looking for stores that have it, and he ends up competing against Sinbad, who plays a mailman who needs it for his kids too. And so it becomes a fight where they go from store to store, and if they have the action figures, Sinbad and Arnold are fighting each other to try to get to it, as well as other people who are in there. So he's trying to get this present. He's kind of neglectful of his family. So Phil Hartman, who is the next door neighbor, plays this sleazy guy who's trying to score with Arnold Schwarzenegger's wife while Arnold Schwarzenegger is out trying to do this thing. And Arnold feels that, he's got to prove himself to his kid because he's getting kind of estranged from his family, and his son really doesn't know him that much. So he figures if he can get him this toy, it would be the greatest thing in the world. And then things spiral out of hand, and it becomes sort of a goofy, cartoon violence, Home Alone-esque sort of slap happy sort of comedy. And that's fine. Schwarzenegger does a good job, doing that, but it's not one of my favorites. It's probably on par with Junior, was one of the weakest comedy films that Schwarzenegger has done. Not one of my favorites, but it still has enough juice in it and still gives you enough. And it's good to see Arnold Schwarzenegger do a little bit something different, and see Phil Hartman playing a sleazy little shitbag, which is great. And even Sinbad gets some good zingers in there. Jingle All the Way is decent, but it's not great, and that's why it's number 30. By the way, kind of interesting news revealed this week that Arnold Schwarzenegger is actually going to be portraying Santa Claus, potentially, in a new movie that's filming right now in New York called The Man with the Bag. It'll be out in time for Christmas next year, I'm assuming. And he looks like he's going to be Santa Claus because he's got the Santa beard, and I think he's got a Santa hat on some of the pictures they've shown, and a Santa suit kind of thing on. So we don't know if he's the actual Santa, if he is a street Santa or a mall Santa or what. We're not sure, and we're not exactly sure what the story's about. They say it's more of an action comedy because Alan Ritchson from Reacher is also in it as well. So I think it's going to be more of a Christmas action film, maybe on par with Red One. Could be better than Red One, though. We'll see. I don't know who's directing it, and I don't know what the story is about, but it's called The Man with the Bag. So maybe it'll be something like that. Maybe someone steals Santa's bag full of toys, and he's got to go to New York to try to find the person who did it, and ends up getting stuck in maybe some sort of mafia thing or terrorist thing or whatever. I don't know. But that's coming up. So you're going to actually be able to see Arnold in another Christmas movie. One more little thing about Arnold. One of his movies that he did direct, he directed a movie called a remake of Christmas in Connecticut. Not on the list because I don't think it was released in theaters. I think it was on Lifetime or something like that. Diane Cannon was in it. It was like the Lifetime Christmas movies were like the precursor to the Hallmark ones. But the fact was Arnold Schwarzenegger directed a Christmas movie called Christmas in Connecticut, and that's kind of interesting. So he's connected to Christmas in some ways, but Jingle All the Way is the one where he mostly is. Number 29 is The Grinch. Not the live action one. That's a little bit higher on the list. Not the animated special. I already talked about that on my animated special list. This is actually an animated film that came out a few years ago with Benedict Cumberbatch as the voice of the Grinch. It was done by Illumination Studios, who did Despicable Me, Hop, Sing, the Minions, stuff like that. So basically what they did is they took the live action Grinch movie, which created a backstory for the Grinch, and the actual special that Chuck Jones did, and sort of mashed them together into an animated film. But they sort of changed the backstory for the Grinch for this movie. But they basically did the backstory of the Grinch that leads to how the Grinch stole Christmas. And that's what this movie's about. It's a decent adaptation. There's never been really a bad adaptation of the Grinch, but it's one of these things that is like, there really was no need to do it. And Benedict Cumberbatch does fine, but there really was no reason to do it. The live action version is a different story, and I'll talk about that tomorrow. But this version is okay. It's fine to watch. It's a quick, fun watch. It's the Grinch, so you kind of know what you're getting. It's illumination, so you still kind of know what you're getting. But in the end, it was like, was it really necessary? Not really, but still a fun one to watch. These are the last three. Number 28 is very interesting. Nora Ephron wrote and directed it. She's the one who wrote When Harry Met Sally and directed Sleepless in Seattle, wrote and directed Sleepless in Seattle. And she's done a bunch of other stuff as well. She's great at this sort of stuff. She wrote My Blue Heaven as well as another one with Steve Martin. This movie has a fantastic premise, but the execution, in my opinion, is kind of lacking, and that's why Mixed Nuts is number 28. Mixed Nuts, you probably never heard of it. Steve Martin, Rita Wilson, but Rita Wilson again. Steve Martin, Rita Wilson, Adam Sandler, Liev Schreiber, Gary Chandler, Juliette Lewis. I feel like I'm missing. Was Madeline Kahn in this one also? She might have been in this one also, if I remember correctly. And it's a fantastic premise. The story takes place at a suicide prevention hotline on Christmas Eve in California. And it's a small little office on the beach in California. It's Christmas time, which is the highest rate of suicides in the country. And it's it's your typical sort of office sort of comedy. You've got different characters and they have different, you have the specific office, characters that you always have in office movies, and, one's in love with the other one and all this stuff. But the premise is that on Christmas Eve, the busiest day of a suicide prevention hotline building, the creepy, sleazy owner of the building that they're renting this out of, played by Gary Shandling, decides that he's going to pick them out after Christmas Eve. Doesn't want them there anymore. Doesn't think that the world needs this. It's losing him money. They're not making rent and so on and so forth. So they have just to the end of the day to finish up what they're doing, and then you have to leave the premises because we're kicking you out. And so it spirals into this kind of, it not only is it a suicide prevention hotline, but it's also a place where people who feel out of place can come to visit as well. And that's where Liev Schreiber comes in, who plays a transvestite. You've got Adam Sandler and Juliette Lewis, who are a pair of young kids who are pregnant, kind of like a Joseph and Mary sort of situation. And I swear, I think it's Madeline Kahn is involved also. She's a rich older lady who needs this job. There's also a serial killer out on the loose. So you throw a whole bunch of stuff in here, and everything comes to a head on Christmas Eve night, and the miracle and all the stuff that happens. The miracle that happens is really bizarre and kind of interesting. And that's where, it's a great premise, but the execution wasn't great, and I wish it was a lot better than it was. But Mixed Nuts is still a decent movie, and even a great presence with bad execution is still a pretty decent movie. And it's one of these that maybe I need to check again. Maybe I just was not in the right mindset. But this is early Adam Sandler before he became the Adam Sandler that we're used to now. And so he's not quite, the cool Adam Sandler that we're used to. But Liev Schreiber's fantastic in it. Gary Shandling is equally sleazoid that he should be. And Steve Martin does Steve Martin stuff. Rita Wilson does Rita Wilson stuff. But it's a decent movie, as I said. Great premise, okay execution. It is Nora Ephron, so there is some good stuff in it, but it's not great, and it's an almost movie. It's one of these movies that almost could have been great, but there's some issues with it. And again, maybe it's one of those that I need to revisit at one point. I just remember it's such a great premise, and it's so perfect. And I just think I didn't like how it ended, and I didn't like how how the miracle happened, and I didn't like some of the characters. I love Liev Schreiber's character, though. I think it's like my introduction to Liev Schreiber was that movie. He's fantastic in it. So that's number 28. Number 27 is Trapped in Paradise. This is the movie that I said my brother-in-law actually enjoys. It's not his favorite Christmas movie. That's Mickey's. That's the Muppets Christmas Carol, but this is a close second or third for him, I think. Trapped in Paradise has a pretty decent cast. Nick Cage, John Lovitz, Dana Carvey, John Ashton. And the basic premise is Nick Cage, John Lovitz, and Dana Carvey are brothers. And they're bank robbers. And they decide to hit this small, like, mountain town or New England town or something on Christmas Eve that looks a lot like Bedford Falls from It's a Wonderful Life. It's old school, sort of, historic little town up in the New England, I believe it is, or upstate New York or something like that. So it's got a little river and covered bridges and historical buildings, and everybody's friendly. And the police station is like a brick building that's like one floor, and it's just like a bunch of just guys in outfits, maybe 3 or 4 police officers. There's not a lot of crime. It's such a small town. They've got a bank and a school and a restaurant and a park and, a pavilion. So it's your typical sort of New England, sweet, historic type of town, New England sort of town. So these 3 guys decide this is the perfect place to hit. Not a lot of people. It's Christmas Eve. It's snowing. Nobody knows who we are. No, and we'll be disguised. And it should be easy to get out because the police department is like 3 dudes who are not in the best shape. And they're just like local dudes that are just, they as I said, they probably don't have any crime at all. At the most, it might be someone screaming that someone's dog went to the bathroom on their yard. So it's just one of these like his pristine historic little towns. So they're like, let's rob this bank. So they rob the bank and they steal the money, and they can't leave the town. Some stuff keeps coming up that stops them, at different times for various reasons. They go the wrong way. The snow's getting too heavy. The police are getting too close to them. One of them falls in love with a woman. One of them loses one of the bags of money. All this, everything that could go wrong does go wrong. But at the same time, as they're trying to get out of this town, they are and they are the people who live there are not the smartest Joes on the planet. These are strangers that they don't recognize, but they are in distress. They seem to be having problems. So they go out of their way to help them try to escape, not knowing they were the people that robbed the bank. So it just becomes sort of things where a small town sort of gets into your soul a little bit, and you're trying to rip them off, and something's keeping you in the town. And while you're in there, you start to kind of fall in love with it and the people. Lovitz and Dana Carvey are just, you think it'd be pretty good between them. Lovitz plays like his liar character. Dana Carvey plays kind of this weird little, he made me talk to me. And Nicolas Cage plays a pretty normal version of himself. And it's an interesting film just because it's so sweet. It's as I said, it's like Bedford Falls. It's like, what if the bank that George worked at was robbed by 3 bank robbers, and they can't leave Bedford Falls, and George and the whole town is trying to help these strangers out. They don't know that they're the robbers, try to help them get to their destination, not knowing they're ripping them off. And that sort of makes them feel guilty. It's sweet. It's kind of nice. And I can understand why my brother-in-law likes it. But the Dana Carvey and John Lovitz characters just seem like they're in a totally different movie. Nicolas Cage is fine. He works out. He fits this movie perfectly. But Lovitz and Dana Carvey are are abnormalities about this movie. But that's maybe what you kind of want, because Nicolas Cage could feel like he could be a dude that lives in that town, where these other two, you don't see it. Trapped in Paradise is interesting, as I said, and that's why it's number 27. That's why it's higher up, because it actually is a fairly decent movie. And as I said, my brother-in-law enjoys it. And I have to talk to him about that. We haven't talked about it in a while. I'm going to see him on Christmas Day, so I want to see. Maybe I'll chat with him about, hey, did you, do you still like, Trapped in Paradise and blah blah blah? And if there's any new Christmas movies you like or whatever. Finally, number 26, as we wrap up our first part of this, 3 minutes left to go before 10 o'clock on the 22nd of December. The last one is one that just came out a few years ago. Also, I think it was only out either on Max or Paramount Plus or something like that. So it's a more recent streaming one. And our friend Neil Patrick Harris pops up in this one again. This is 8-Bit Christmas is number 26. 8-Bit Christmas is basically a modern update of A Christmas Story. Now, if you remember Christmas Story, Ralphie wants a BB gun, and there's stuff that gets in his way with him not being able to get the BB gun. 8-Bit Christmas takes place in the 80s and 90s. I think it's more 80s than 90s. And it's about a boy, young boy, a teenager who wants to get an NES, a Nintendo Entertainment System video game console for Christmas. But his parents really don't want it to get it for him, or they can't afford it, or it's one of those things where it's hard to find. And so he's trying to find a way that he can get this 8-bit NES for Christmas, because that's the only thing he wants. Neil Patrick Harris narrates the movie. He's the young boy basically telling his children the story of his best Christmas or whatever. Steve Zahn plays his father, who's a great comedic actor as well, works out perfectly. Again, as I said, it's sort of a remake of, it's like an updating of A Christmas Story that's not quite as insane as it was, but it's set in the 1980s and 90s, has a similar premise. Kid wants a specific toy, gets it. It's pretty decent. Again, not an outstanding one, but not a truly awful one, because we're getting close now to the top 25. So as we're getting closer, the last few, Mixed Nuts, Trapped in Paradise, and this have been fairly decent movies. And there's 25 other better movies than it that I like personally. But 8-Bit Christmas is still an entertaining movie, and it's still a fun one to watch. And only problem is, if you don't have the streaming services, I don't think it's available anywhere else. It might not even be available on that anymore, because they tend to wipe those things out. It's not on Blu-ray. It's not on anywhere. You can only get it on that network, I believe. So that's it. That's my top 50 to 26 with two honorable mentions of my top 50 Christmas movies of all time, part one. Stay tuned. Tomorrow night, I should be able to finish this up with part two, where we get 25 through 1. Probably be a little bit longer than the hour and 46 minutes this episode was, because I'll have a lot more to say, because the next 25 movies are more my favorite ones, and I'll be able to talk more in depth about the reason why I like them. But at the same time, keep in mind that it's Christmas Eve tomorrow, and a lot of stuff is going on. But thank you for watching. It's 10 o'clock. I still got to go to work tomorrow. For those of you who don't, congratulations. It's awesome. My kids don't. My wife doesn't. So it's fun, but it should be okay. It should be a quick, easy traffic day for me, so it shouldn't be too bad. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for tomorrow. Not tomorrow. Come back here tomorrow for part 2, where we get number 25 through number 1 of the best Christmas movies of all time. Thanks.